Honorable Mr. Jan Bondi, Ambassador of the Czech Republic in Greece, Professor John Murmúra, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Greece, Vice President at the Confederation of Industry in the Czech Republic, Mr. Radek Spicar, President and founder of New York College Educational Group, Mr. Ilias Foutsis, Provost of New York College Educational Group, Mr. Dimitrios Bouradas, Honorable Ambassador of Romania in Greece, it's great to have you here today with us, and representative of the Embassy of Nigeria in Greece, distinguished guests, dear friends. I am Christos Diamantopoulos, and on behalf of New York College, it is with great honor and joy that I welcome you to today's talk on exiting from the crisis, the Czech Republic's rules of thumb as an example for Greece. Today's event is the result of the collaboration between New York College Athens and the University of New York in Prague, UNYP, members of the same educational group, together with the Embassy of the Czech Republic in Greece. At this point, I would like to express my warm thanks to the Embassy of the Czech Republic in Greece, and in particular to the Ambassador, Mr. Jan Bondi. Honorable Ambassador, we would like to thank you very much for your support in organizing this event and for your very interesting ideas and views that give us a boost in organizing such talks. Likewise, we wish to thank Mr. Radek Spicar for being here with us today, sharing his knowledge and his experience on the topic of our event. We would also particularly like to thank the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Greece, Mr. Iωάννη Murmúra, for his presence today. We are confident that from the high administrative position he holds, he will have many interesting facts to share with us. Likewise, finally, I think we should not leave out the President of the New York College Educational Group, Mr. Ilias Foutsis, who is always next to young people and who constantly support academic initiatives like today's talk. Also, in today's talk, we were to have together with us a member of the Greek Parliament and Chief of the New Democracy Foreign Affairs section and candidate in the North region of Athens, Mr. George Koumoutsakos, and Professor of International Law and Foreign Policy and candidate in the First District of Athens with New Democracy, Mr. Angelos Syrigos. Unfortunately, they apologize for not being here today with us. As you all know, we have New Democracy submitted a motion of censure at the Hellenic Parliament, which the government turned it into a vote of confidence with a subsequent vote scheduled for today. So both of them, they will not able to be present here in this event because they have to be present in the whole procedure in the Hellenic Parliament. Before proceeding with a brief introduction to the topic of this evening's talk, I would like a few minutes of your time to talk to you about New York College Educational Group. New York College has been active in the field of education for more than 30 years. It was founded in 1988 when it started its collaboration with the State University of New York, the biggest state university of the United States. This collaboration is still active both in New York College Athens and in the University of New York in Prague, UNYP. New York College provides bachelor's, master's and doctoral degrees in collaboration with distinguished universities in Europe and the United States, and always according to the current legal and institutional framework of our country in areas such as business administration, communication, tourism, information technology, shipping, psychology, international relations and more. As part of the college's academic activities, centers such as the Center for Geopolitical Analysis and the Center for Diplomacy and Political Technologies have been set up for the academic actions of which we will ensure that those who wish will receive regular information. In regard with today's topic, I would not like to say anything more, as we have distinguished speakers among us, whose views I am sure you are eager to listen to. At this point, I would like to call for the Honorable Ambassador of the Czech Republic in Greece, Mr. Jan Bondi, to step up into the podium and enlighten us with his thoughts on the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Christos. Thank you very much. Kalispera σας. Good evening, distinguished guests, friends, dear friends, if you allowed me to say, students, and I'm really very happy to see you here today. Well, as you saw, the headline of this event should be some cooperation and good case example how the Czech Republic managed to overcome some difficulties and should be a good partner for Greece. And I hope that we still are able to do these things, to be really supportive. We are on your side, and thanks to the activity of my team at the embassy. They are sitting here, Jitka Chromcová and Milan Fischer, representing the economical part of our embassy, is always open and able to provide you with the informations or with the orientations. Mr. Radek Spicar is a known economist in Czech Republic. He has a knowledge and because he went through many years of the transformation of the Czech economy from the state, the less working system to the functioning system, with still many mistakes and difficulties until now, and I appreciate his openness to inform us about the current situation and the way how we manage some of the things. We are not at the end of the road. We will never be at the end of the road. We will be always somewhere in the positions to improve our activities, and we think and we hope that also these bilateral activity between our beautiful countries will be stronger and more fruitful than it is. There are several sectors we are trying to approach, to attach. It's a sector of tourism, it's a sector of healthcare, it's a sector of exchanging of informations. There are some startups between our countries that they are thinking how to come together and how to cooperate closely. And thanks to activities of Mr. Ilias Futsis, who is representing these fruitful bilateral cooperation on the level of education. So the New York College in Prague, based in the city center of Prague, and also here in Athens, it's a very good location, and he's really someone who can support and speak and say something good about the cooperation that we have. And his inspiration was actually to organize such a meeting. I'm thankful for this. Well, so enjoy the evening with our speakers. I hope there will be space for your questions, and we are ready to answer it. And again, welcome to our presentation. Thank you very much.
Also today with us we have the ambassador of Indonesia in Greece. We would like to welcome you, Mr. Ambassador. It is a great honor to have you here with us. So, will the rector of New York College, Mr. Dimitrios Bouradas, please step up to the podium for a brief greeting?
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. Our honorable guest, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, excuse me for my Greco-Franco-English. This is the reason to be brief. To begin with, I would like to thank the renowned economist, Mr. Spicar, and the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Greece, Mr. Murmúra, for the valuable knowledge they will share with us, which our country highly needs at this moment. Also, I would like to thank every one of you for your participation in this learning journey. Personally, I would like to briefly present the big picture. I believe so much to the big picture. Because if we have not the big picture, we cannot understand the small pictures. The big pictures into which we should incorporate the best practice and the procedures of other countries such as the Czech Republic. I believe that the following thoughts could draw this picture. First, I think that Greece cannot exit from this economic crisis and hope for a better future through incremental changes. The country needs turnaround, thus, or transformation, that is the need for radical change, radical transformation. Moreover, these radical changes should be applied anywhere, at the state, at the justice system, economy, education, health, etc. In our culture, international strategic alliances, and mainly in our political system. Certainly, these changes have to be completed with a strategic and comprehensive national plan which will be supported by all political parties with national consensus. These changes need to be aligned and coordinated because the country is a whole, which means that there are cause-effect relationships among its specific parts. In other words, there can be no changes in economy without the appropriate changes in the state or the education system. Likewise, no change can occur in the state or the education systems if the justice system remains the same. Furthermore, these plans are unquestionably necessary. Yet, what is the most vital is for their effective implementation. This can be achieved if we face the lack of leadership and management in all sectors, such as state, private companies, hospitals, schools, etc. For all the above mentioned reasons, our society needs to believe that we can become a role model for the other countries, since we possess significant tangible and intangible resources like our geographical position, climate, our seas, our mountains, our human resources, our ancient philosophy. We need to embrace fundamental values for society of cohesion and prosperity. Values like integrity, efficiency, excellence, justice, phronesis, innovativeness, cooperation, and synergies. I wish that we all citizens, businessmen, managers, professors, politicians, and others learn from the mistakes of the past. Because, as Santayana says, if we do not learn from our past, we will repeat them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your speech. And at this point, let's move to the core of this event. I would like to call for the Professor John Murmúra, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Greece, to step up to the podium and share his thoughts with us.
Can you hear me? Now it's better. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to address this afternoon's event, and I would like to thank the organizers, the Czech Republic's Embassy here in Athens, and the New York College Group here in Athens and in Prague, especially its president, Mr. Elias Foutsis. As you know, in the European continent, naturally, the focus over the last few months is on the European Parliament elections in 2 weeks' time, and of course on Brexit. Brexit is of great interest to our host country today, as the Czech economy has a big exposure through its car industry to the United Kingdom. On a lighter note, it is rather ironic that this will be the year that the UK will have left the European Union, but 2019 will also be remembered as the year that 4 British football clubs play against each other at the finals for the 2 European Cups, Europa League and UEFA Cup, and obviously come at the top of European football. Ladies and gentlemen, in the rest of the world, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific side, where I was for the last 4 weeks in both places, it is the ongoing trade war between the US and China that makes the headlines and could be the trigger for the next global recession. And it is not just about tariffs, which is of course an issue. It is all about the China-US competition in terms of taking the technological lead on digital technology, artificial intelligence, and medical breakthroughs. Futurists are talking about a new Cold War, a technological Cold War between China and the US. And clearly Europe should not be indifferent to that. For the obvious short-term reason, if tariffs affect Europe as well, and if Europe could stand to gain from this tit for tat. More importantly, and from a longer-term perspective, let's think how the world will look, say, in 10-20 years from now. China will be widely accepted as a political military superpower, threatening US military dominance, and the question then would be how Europe would position itself in this new bipolar world, as some European countries will soon find themselves before the following existential problem. They could be faced with a potential weakening of the Western alliance. On the one hand, I refer to President Trump's latest intention with regard to a reduced role of NATO, WTO, in the global political and economic environment, and all this nonsense, if you allow me to say, we have been hearing recently. On the other hand, given the increasing economic penetration of China into Europe, which is apparently part of a broader plan, the well-known Silk Road, in Portugal, they have literally, the Chinese bought everything. There have been massive buyouts for all sorts of firms, extensive investments in Italy, in violation sometimes of EU competition rules. So what will be the future role of Europe, say, in 10 years from now, in this new two-polar landscape? This should be at the top of the European leaders' agenda. Allow me now to come to the $1 million question, and this is on the next global recession. Later I'll talk about Europe and then about my country, Greece. This global recession may well be triggered by the ongoing trade war, which by coincidence was the theme of my speeches in conferences in New Jersey in the States, as well as in Melbourne and Singapore over the last month. 2 points. Firstly, on the question of when, and second point, if we are better prepared today than we were in the last financial crisis in 2008. First of all, some numbers. Global economic growth slowed substantially towards the end of 2018 and in the beginning of 2019. The US growth rate is expected to decelerate to 2.3 this year from 2.9 last year. In the euro area, real GDP growth was surprisingly slow in the second half of 2018, showing increased divergence among the largest euro area countries. Euro area growth is projected to drop to 1.1% in 2019 from 1.8% last year. In China also, the slowdown in economic activity is set to continue, dropping from 6.6% the previous year to 6.3% in this year. Last year, advanced economies had diverged growth rates and therefore adopted different stances on monetary policy. This trend seems to be reversing as monetary authorities shift towards a more dovish bias in response to weakening economic momentum. The US Federal Reserve surprised markets with its highly accommodative message and announcements during its March meeting. In March also, the European Central Bank's Governing Council took a more accommodative stance than investors anticipated. It maintained its key rates, deposit and refinancing rate at minus 0.4% and 0% respectively. The ECB extended its forward guidance on its key rates, indicating that it now expects them to remain at their present levels at least through the end of 2019. Analysts looking into the signs of recession said that this time may be different, given that the US economy has been expanding for an unusually long period of time, nearly 10 years. They point to the inversion of the yield curve, that the room for maneuver in terms of monetary policy is limited and the macroeconomy is complicated on the back of cross currents between tariffs and trade wars on the one side and fiscal stimulus and tax cuts on the other. It is indeed difficult to predict when the next recession will take place, although some have argued that given the sour extent of the last crisis, there are higher chances of an earlier repetition. It is perhaps easier to predict its severity. We cannot predict the future, but we can be prepared for it by making informed choices and decisions. Today, we are clearly better prepared than in 2008 to counter the next global recession whenever it comes. On the question when this might happen, a Delphic oracle applies. Not in the foreseeable future, meaning a late cycle, but not yet the end of the cycle. On the second point, whether we are better prepared for the next crisis, I discussed this at length and gave a positive answer in my latest book, Speeches on Monetary Policy and Global Capital Markets. To cut a long story short, let me restrict my remarks to Europe. Is the Eurozone better prepared for the next crisis? In short, we could say that the Eurozone is more resilient than in 2008. Thanks to a whole new supervisory framework which has been set up to prevent a future crisis of such an extent and to improve the coordination of national supervisory authorities. This framework encompasses European Systemic Risk Board, the European Banking Authority for banks, the European Securities and Market Authorities ESMA for capital markets. It's of course the single supervisory mechanism, the single resolution mechanism. It's missing the EDIS, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme. I'll say about this more in a minute. And last but not least is the European Stability Mechanism, ESM, with a maximum lending capacity of 500 billion euros to help any of its members if it faces financial difficulties. Let me now focus on the challenges ahead for the European Union. The challenges ahead. It is useful to remember the vision of the founding fathers of the European Union, including Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, Piero Spinelli, and others. Down the road, they were envisioning a United States of Europe. I myself am a well-known proclaimed pro-European, but today I'll be a bit skeptical about the future course of Europe if we continue with this one step forward and two steps back policies. Of course, 2019 is a milestone year. This year, the Euro and the Eurozone celebrate their 20th anniversary. It is a birthday occasion, so I don't want to spoil the party much. The first decade of the Eurozone's history was a prolonged cycle of economic expansion. High employment rates, taking advantage of the low interest rate environment and prosperity for Europeans. It was followed by the 2010-2012 sovereign debt crisis, which resulted in high levels of unemployment and poor growth performance. Amidst the crisis, the ECB used all the appropriate instruments at its disposal. It contributed to price stability by reducing base rates, by cutting refinancing costs for countries in distress through the Securities Market Program, providing liquidity to banks through LTROs, announcing the outright monetary transactions program, emergency liquidity assistance by national central banks to banks facing liquidity shortages, and of course, its massive asset purchase program, known as QE, quantitative easing, amounting to 2.6 trillion euros. This very severe debt crisis hit countries of the Euro periphery the hardest. 4 of them, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, and Cyprus, plus Spain, had to follow adjusted programs to bring their economies back on track. A stark difference, of course, between Greece and the other countries is that in Greece we relied on 3 MOUs, 3 memoranda, borrowing heavily about 240 billion euros from all 3 programs up to now. Hopefully this is over, with the European loans at very low rates. With the other 3 countries had only 1 MOU, and as a result they had received much lower amounts. Indicatively, Ireland about 68 billion, Portugal 77 billion, and Cyprus just 7 billion. Greece was the first country to enter a financial assistance program, and unfortunately the last one to exit it last August. So an obvious question is, what went wrong in Greece? I wrote extensively on this question. This is not the right venue to discuss it, with articles in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, many international fora, and the Greek press at that time. The bottom line is that there were apparent mistakes from the successive Greek governments and our leaders on technical issues on the fiscal side. There was no need for such unprecedented austerity. On the timing of the debt restructuring, on the sequencing of reforms, on long delays of the mother of all reforms, namely the privatization agenda. At the time, I was Deputy Finance Minister for several months and then Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister for 2 years. Ex post, if I can make a personal point for the first time in public, I can tell I did not manage to substantially change the course of events. My proposals on how to improve things within the MOUs and beyond during the period 2010-2014, documented in my 2-volume book entitled The Double Crisis, fell to the deaf ears of our lenders and unfortunately few Greek ministers at the time. To give you an example, back in 2014, I suggested how to reduce the burden of taxation within the MOU, and indeed lower corporate tax rates. The idea goes through lower primary surpluses. You can understand my delight years later when the main opposition leader took up my proposal in his economic program in 2017, and the government today is trying to reduce the primary budget surplus targets from 3.5% to 2.5% of GDP. On the eve of the Eurozone's third decade, I believe that there are 3 main challenges that will, I'm afraid, continue to exist. There will be topics of concern up until the following European elections in 2014, unless a strong EU leadership emerges like the one in the 1990s. The first point of division is migration and divisions between EU member states over immigration and asylum policy. Given that the migratory flows from poor countries, predominantly in Africa, will continue, there are already more than 1 million pending visa applications in the EU. And according to recent reports, Europe is their top destination. This will strengthen populism and divisions among European governments. Let me remind you that 4 member states have already populist governments in Europe: Poland, Austria, Hungary, and our neighbor country, Italy. The rising share of the vote for populist national parties carries the risk of an unofficial alliance against pro-European forces and policy inertia at EU level, given that populist parties focus on blocking and boycotting the policies of the EU, and they might end up setting the agenda in European politics away from the pro-business, pro-market policies towards some form of big government. 1 second. A second point of division has to do with the fact that the North European member states are still not willing to accept burden sharing, which is a precondition, of course, for a full-blown economic and monetary union in Europe. It is necessary to equip the Eurozone with a fiscal union, Eurobond, fiscal transfers, etc., and a complete banking union to provide sufficient reassurance against financial crisis by completing its third pillar, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme that I referred earlier, which could provide for a more uniform degree of deposit guarantee for all retail depositors across the EU. Finally, the third point of division in Europe lies, and I'm afraid also in the future, in the continuing divergence between the North and the South with regard to real wages and productivity. And if Europe heads towards a recession, this will complicate matters even further. Despite this divergence, overall the single currency has been a success, and the euro is an integral part of the European integration that is supported by an overwhelming majority of the public, at an all-time high at 74% according to the latest Eurobarometer. And this division should be overcome in order to safeguard the stability of its future. Finally, on Greece. Allow me now to say a few words with regard to the current situation and the challenges of the Greek economy. Despite its recent economic hardships, Greece is firmly a member of an advanced economic club with global influence, the Eurozone. It is member of the OECD, of the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO. It is an important player in Southeast Europe, a leader in the Balkan area, a pillar of stability and security in the region. Greece also has an increased strategic geopolitical role in the region, as it is becoming an energy hub for the transport of natural gas to the European continent through the conclusion of international agreements on the EastMed, Greece, Cyprus and Israel, and TAP energy pipelines, which are strongly supported by our strategic ally, the United States. The country is now in the post-surveillance framework after exiting the third MOU last August. Looking forward, there should be no complacency or slackening of effort on behalf of the national authorities, especially this year, a multiple election year in Greece. The government must commit to the implementation of growth-enhancing reforms and not lag behind its post-bailout commitments, particularly in the public sector, including administrative reforms and speeding up of judicial procedures. This is particularly imperative in this international environment with the global recession around the corner. By the way, it is really sad that another opportunity seems that has been lost to include Article 16 in the upcoming amendment of the Greek Constitution with regard to the role of private higher education in Greece. According to my personal view, this is my personal view, there are still 4 challenges ahead for the Greek economy. First of all, the permanent lifting of capital controls. Let me remind you that it was in the first place back in June 2015 when, for financial stability considerations, the Bank of Greece recommended the implementation of capital controls to the government and to our lenders. Lots has been said. Let me leave this behind. It was a dark period for the Greek economy. There has been full liberalization for domestic transactions, but not yet for international transactions. The full lifting of capital controls is only a matter of months. It may perhaps come right after the general election, due to be held by October this year, if not earlier. This would be the catalyst for the full recovery of trust of depositors and the return of around 20 billion euros hoarded in mattresses and safety deposits, but also boost investor confidence in the prospects of the economy and help banks and private enterprises to lower their cost of financing through capital markets. A second challenge is for Greece to reach the investor grade, currently at BB-, 2 notches below the investor grade at 3B-. Regaining the investor grade held in 2008 is as important as ensuring debt sustainability. This should be at the top of Greece's policy agenda over the next year or so. Its significance is comparable to meeting the Maastricht nominal criteria in the 1990s that allowed the country to enter the euro area. It would sum up all the efforts in terms of fiscal discipline, the continuation of reforms and privatization. Δώστε του λίγο νεράκι, θα σκάσει ο άνθρωπος. Συγγνώμη. The third challenge is the major problem of non-performing loans, the Achilles heel of the Greek banking sector. The drastic reduction of NPLs is within reach over the next 2 years, thanks to the efforts of Greek commercial banks, which employ a large toolkit for resolving the NPL problem, and on top of that, thanks to the two systemic proposals of the Hellenic FSF and the Bank of Greece, based on the idea of securitization, which should be implemented in parallel, seen as complements rather than substitutes. Resolving the NPL problem timely will enable the Greek banking sector, on the one hand, to reverse back to its traditional banking role, namely that of providing liquidity to the real economy, and on the other hand, to tackle the new modern challenges of the banking industry, such as the increasing competition from financial technology companies, payment systems based on developing blockchain solutions, and artificial intelligence and banking applications. Finally and foremost, the challenge for Greece is to maintain sustainable growth rates beyond 2% in the next decade or so. This will be achieved through lower taxation across the board and especially lower corporate tax rates, sending a strong signal to the international investor community that Greece means business, and at the same time rallying their interest to attract foreign direct investment, that is greenfield investment, which translate into jobs and growth. I traveled the whole world with my previous hats and the current one, trying to mobilize the Greek diaspora from London and Europe through New York and the US to the Far East in Asia and Australia. I have been talking to sovereign funds, investment banking groups and multinational companies, trying to raise their interest in greenfield investment in Greece by pointing out that the country risk has dramatically been reduced, that valuations are low, unit labor costs have dropped, and reforms have been implemented in the labor market, making this a favorable environment in sectors such as tourism, logistics, energy, startups. My message to all of them is simple and crystal clear. This is the time to invest in Greece. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Murmúra, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Your viewpoint on the topic is very stimulating. And now it's the turn of Mr. Radek Spicar to step up to the podium. Mr. Spicar has a series of occupations all related with industry and economy. I think today, in today's event, I think you may represent the Czech Republic's engine of economy, I should say. So we are very eager to listen to your thoughts.
Excellencies, professors, distinguished civil servants, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a big fan of an Irish rock band U2, and they've written a beautiful song named A Song for Someone, and in the lyrics it says, "It's hard to listen while you preach." So I'm not here to preach, I'm rather here to listen, so hopefully there'll be an interaction with the audience after the speech, because hopefully you will learn something from our experience when it comes to our very difficult economic transformation, which has not been finished, as the ambassador rightly pointed out. But I'm also here to listen and learn something from your experience, because there were 3 reasons why I accepted with pleasure the invitation to come to this today's event. Well, first of all, I always wanted to visit Athens. This is my first time. I'm here with the whole family because they didn't want me to visit it alone. And I have to say that after one day in this city, I'm already in love, with the town. It's beautiful. So it has already worked for me very well. Secondly, we in the Czech Republic follow the current developments in Greece with a lot of sympathy, because we've been going through very difficult times in last 3 decades, basically, since the Velvet Revolution, which in our case took place in 1989. And thirdly, and I'm glad that the previous speaker has opened this topic, we are now together in the European Union, and I will only briefly touch upon it in my presentation, but there's a big paradox when it comes to our membership in the EU. Although we are probably the most dependent, at least economically, on the European Union, because we are so export-oriented economy, we are at the same moment the most Eurosceptical country in the whole Union. So if you look at the recent opinion polls, when it comes to, for example, the popularity of Euro, we are the most Eurosceptic country in the whole EU. There are many reasons for that, and I would like to discuss it with you after the presentation. I was asked by the organizers, and again, thanks for the invitation, to share with you a few experiences of ours with our economic transformation, and I'll start early on in the 1989, because that's when it all started. You know, going back to the end of the First World War, you have to keep in mind that there's something we are extremely proud of. At that time, at the beginning of 1920s, we were, Czechoslovakia at that time, we were among the top 10 most developed and richest countries in the world. We were more productive and richer than Switzerland, for example, or Austria at that time. We were the most developed, most industrialized part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But after the 50 years of communism, that all disappeared. And at the beginning of 90s, after the Velvet Revolution, the whole economy was almost facing a bankruptcy. A great example is the biggest company in the Czech Republic called Skoda Auto. You might know some of its products. Taxi drivers obviously like that car, as I noticed on the streets. I spent many years working in Skoda. That's where I started my business career. That company is extremely important for the whole economy. Just imagine one company represents 5% of our country's GDP. One company, 5% of our country's GDP. And 10% of our country's export. One company, 10% of a country's export. That company was on the edge of bankruptcy at the beginning of 90s. And it was only thanks to Volkswagen, I'm glad to see German ambassador here in the audience, that the company survived and is now the second most profitable brand within the Volkswagen Group. And as you probably know, there are 12 brands in the Volkswagen Group, including Bugatti, Lamborghini, Audi, and Skoda is the second most profitable brand. And it tells a lot about the economy and how we made it and where we are at the moment. So how it started. It started with an idea, with an ambition of ours and our politicians after the end of the communist regime, that we will be able to do it ourselves, that we will manage without foreign investors. We didn't want Germans to come and save us, we didn't want Italians to come and save us, we didn't want the French to come and save us. We thought that after 50 years of being told what to do from the Moscow, we will be finally making our own decisions about our future in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, without the need to seek help from the outside. That period lasted for 3 or 4 years, and we call it the Czech way of transformation. It collapsed. It didn't work out. Why? There were many reasons for it, but I wrote down 3 major reasons. First of all, and I think it was the crucial reason why it didn't work, we were missing capital. You cannot transform your economy without sufficient capital. And what we learned in last 3 decades since the revolution is that to generate domestic capital in a country where the capital is missing, it does not take 3 years. It does not take 10 years. It takes 3 decades to have your own national champions that are able to invest into R&D, to employ people in your country, or even to invest outside of the country. So it took Saska 30 years to generate enough capital to buy OPAP in Greece, you know. But it really took us 30 years to generate enough capital to transform the economy and to have national Czech capital able to help the economy to grow or either to expand abroad. So the lack of capital was the main reason why we were not able to do it on our own. Second reason, the lack of know-how. We didn't have sufficient know-how. As I said, centuries ago, we were the most industrialized country within the whole empire. But during those 50 years of communism, we lost our competencies. So even in the automotive industry, we were not on the top. In heavy machinery, neither. In chemical industry, energetics, it was the same. So we needed top global know-how. We didn't have it. The Germans had it. The US companies had it. That's why we needed to invite them. And last but not least, the problem was with morals and ethics. And it turned out that because Czechs were deprived of economic growth for 50 years, because they were deprived of private property, because under the communist regime everything was nationalized, we were missing private property, people were not able to pursue happiness, as it's written in the US Constitution. When they had an opportunity to do business at the beginning of the transformation, they wanted to get rich fast instead of provide stability for their companies in the long run. So when Czech people acquired, for example, during privatization or during restitutions of confiscated property by the communists, when they acquired back their companies, they very fast asset stripped the companies, tunneled them, as we started to call the process, sold the equipment, get rich, and then left for Bahamas or for the United States. So lack of ethics from the domestic people was a big problem, and it turned out that foreign investors were more serious about the future of the economy and its stability than many local people. So we said enough after 4 or 5 years, and we decided to do it the standard way. In other words, to invite foreign partners, foreign investors. And very fast, we became extremely successful in that. And for many years since that decision, we were the most successful country when it came to inflow of FDI, foreign direct investment, into Central and Eastern Europe. And I wrote down a few reasons why we were so successful. I was a part of that process because at that time I already worked as a civil servant for an agency called Czech Invest, which was created solely to proactively travel around the world and try to attract foreign investment. We don't have such a big diaspora abroad, so for us it was a little bit more difficult. Czechs are not rich in the United States or elsewhere, so we had to talk to the big multinational companies. But we were very successful in this respect, and it was really fast. So what were the selling points that worked the most? First place, cheaper but qualified labor. At the moment, we have a big problem with that. I will get to it at the end of my presentation, but at the beginning, it worked extremely well. Cheaper and qualified labor force. Nowadays, it's not that important. In the age of fourth industrial revolution with automatization, digitalization, robotization, this is not what you should sell abroad. But at the beginning of 90s or in the mid-90s, it worked extremely well. Secondly, infrastructure. Infrastructure is extremely important. And we had it, at least at that time, because when you are such an industrial superpower, and we are together with Romania, the most industrialized countries in the EU, when you have so much industry, more than Germany, for example, compared to the GDP, you need good infrastructure. And we always had it. Great waterways, great railways, great highways. So that was an important selling point. We are not there yet. Poland is, for example, at the moment doing much better in terms of infrastructure constructions because, unlike us, they took great advantage of EU structural funds. They really made it, and at the moment they have a lot to offer while we are lagging behind. But at the 90s, this was important. Third reason, geographical location. We tend to say that Czech Republic is located in the heart of Europe, And when you open a logistical center for your company in the Czech Republic, you can really serve north, south, east, west without any problems. Also, given the fact the infrastructure used to be so good. So geographical location. Labor unions. That was extremely interesting. Of course, during the communist regime, labor unions played an important role in the business in general. But it turned out that after the revolution, they became quite moderate. They lost their influence, they lost their power, but it did not radicalize them. On the contrary, they were happy to survive. They were happy that the new management and new owners tolerated them in their companies, and they behaved in a very moderate way. So when I was negotiating with big investors who were deciding where to invest, whether Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, they were telling me, Radek, you know, we will limit our activities in France because people go on strike, you know, every second month, while here in the Czech Republic you have labor unions. We met them, but they seem to be quite okay. And when they looked at the statistics, it turned out that they almost never went on strike. So labor unions and their ability to talk to the management, press it for higher wages, of course, that's their job, and we should not be surprised that they're doing it, but not doing more, not to be too radical, was of a big help. Czech Invest and the role of the government. The government said, we want FDI and we will do our best to attract it. There were governments changing, left wing, right wing, but this stayed as their priority throughout the election cycles. And that was really important. And there were a lot of people, the best people that the government had, working on our ability to attract foreign direct investment. And last reason, which I underestimated at the beginning during the negotiations, but it turned out to be one of the most important reasons, was our ability to offer quality of life in the Czech Republic, which the foreign investors consider to be much higher than the quality of life in Poland or Hungary, for example. And I found out that this was so important when I had the first meeting with Toyota CEO, who later on invested in the Czech Republic. And he asked me, Radek, how many golf courses there are in the Czech Republic? I had no idea. And I didn't study it because I thought, you know, this Japanese golf freak, you know, asked about it because he's obviously obsessed with golf. But then I talked to Hyundai people, and they asked at the end of the negotiation the very same question, Radek, how many golf courses there are? I was like, guys, why are you asking this question? Did you talk to the Japanese, you know, and you tested the know-how of the Czech government officials about their country, etc.? And they told me no. But the truth is that if we decide to invest in the Czech Republic, we will be the ones, the negotiators of the first deal, who will be setting up the factory. We will be living here for 3, 4, 5 years with our families, and we care about the quality of life in this country. So they asked about the golf courses, they asked about international schools, by the way. We really had to work hard at the beginning to provide enough and of high quality international schools, because that's what we were missing after the revolution, because managers' children have to study somewhere. Then quality of opera, whether you can get to the opera for reasonable price, not like in New York. Quality of air. I didn't understand why those managers were so obsessed with the quality of air until I worked for a couple of months in China. Then you know how important it is, and stuff like that. So quality of life, it's really important, because those who make the most important business decisions want to have some kind of work-life balance, and they want to enjoy life, you know, besides the work in their companies. So enormous influx of FDI, and we basically sold out the economy. So at the moment, if you look at the structure of the Czech economy, it does not belong to us anymore. If I just looked at one sector, which is important for the economy, as you know very well, banking sector, finance. The biggest Czech bank, Česká spořitelna, is owned by Erste, Austria. The second biggest bank is owned by Société Générale, France. And the third biggest Czech bank, Československá obchodní banka, is owned by KBC, Belgium. So we lost control of our economy. I worked with McKinsey France for a year on a study how much of our GDP is produced by foreign companies, daughters of foreign mothers doing business in the Czech Republic. Our estimate, 85%, maybe 90%. So, for a long time, it worked very well, but do you know when it stopped working so well? During the crisis. Because when some companies, I will not name them, Volkswagen, for example, when they were facing the difficult dilemma where to help and what to do during the crisis, they tended to help their mother companies in their homeland rather than helping their daughter companies in foreign lands far in the east. So the ownership suddenly became an issue. When you don't control the economy, you don't have your mother companies in your country, you might pay the price. So where we are at the moment? At the moment, when I'm invited to such distinguished international events, it's a pleasure to go and sell the great macroeconomic numbers, because you probably know that we have the lowest unemployment rate in the EU, and we've had it for 3 subsequent years. Believe it or not, the unemployment rate is below 2%, which is horrible. For the politicians, it's a blessing. For us employers, it's a curse. We are unable to use, and we've been unable to take advantage of the economic peak because we don't have enough people to work in our factories. We have to reject jobs, deals. We are being fined by companies that buy either services or goods from the Czech Republic because we are simply unable to produce enough because of the lack of people. So 2% unemployment. Sounds good, doesn't it? Secondly, economic growth. 3 years ago, 6%. 2 years ago, 4%. This year, although we are probably at the beginning or already in the slowdown of the economy, it's going to be 3%. So it's still pretty good. And last but not least, social cohesion. The risk of being poor, people facing poverty, is the lowest in the EU. We are doing better in this respect when it comes to social cohesion of the society than Scandinavian countries, which for many years were the benchmark, for social cohesion of the society. So if I stop now, you would say Czech Republic made it, it was not easy, 30 years of transformation, now they are doing extremely well. But there is one big but, which I would like to conclude my presentation with. We are trapped in something we, as Confederation of Industry, representing all the biggest employers vis-à-vis the labor unions and the government, we call cheap economy. Cheap economy. And I will illustrate our current situation on 4 numbers. Whether you look at hourly wage of Czech employee, it's 10 euros. So per hour, the average wage is 10 euros. Can you guess how much it is in Germany? Students? 10 euros in the Czech Republic and in Germany, an hourly wage on average.
I think it is 13 euros, I think.
3-0? Are you saying 3-0?
3-0.
Yes, it's 30 euros. We are getting 1/3. It makes people angry. And actually, one of the reasons why we are so anti-European is that people don't see the benefits of our membership and our participation on the internal market on their salaries. So Czech Republic 10 euros, Germany 30 euros. But there's another number which is extremely important, and that's the hourly productivity or the value of work that the company receives from that employee within 1 hour. The value of work that our employees on average provide to their employers per hour is 12 euros. So we are able to produce a value of 12 euros per hour. In Germany, guess? It's similar. 42 euros. So the value produced within 1 hour in Germany is 42. There's a huge difference. What is it caused by? There are 3 characteristics of the cheap economy that we are struggling with at the moment. First of all, we are not final producers. We don't have final products. We are subsidiaries. We are producing spare parts. Using the example of the automotive industry, Germans have the final product. They have the Audi car. We produce brakes and gear shifts. When you produce spare parts, your margin, if you're lucky in the automotive industry, is 5%. While when you're a final producer, your margin could be more than 20%. So you can definitely, with such a high margin, pay your people much better than when you're struggling with 5%. Secondly, as I said, we don't own our economy. It's foreign capital mostly, 85%, 90%, which means that every year on dividends, we are losing enormous amounts of money. It's simply floating out of the country. Yeah. Nobody should criticize foreign investors for doing this. Czech investors in Greece, they'll do the same if they are successful, if they generate profit. But because the structure of the economy, we are losing enormous amounts of money every year. And that is money which is missing in the national economy. It could be invested into people, into salaries, into research and development, investments into fourth industrial revolution, etc. We don't have it. It's leaving Czech Republic to Germany, France, United States, and elsewhere. And last but not least, the level of digitalization, robotization, and automatization is very low. So when people say 2% unemployment, Radek, that's fantastic. I say, well, it's not that fantastic. Because when you look at Škoda Auto is employing 30,000 people on assembly lines. They work on assembly lines. So when you look at Hyundai, when you look at Kia, Japanese OEMs, but even German car makers, when you look at their assembly lines, you don't see that many people there. Therefore, they are more productive, they generate more money, and those who are the humans who are still working there can be paid better than those 30,000 people working manually on the assembly line. We can employ them as a Czech industry, regardless of their qualification. If you only have elementary school degree, we will take you because we need your simple, stupid manual labor on the assembly line, but it does really not help the economy and our productivity. So, to be honest, we thought 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that we are done with the transformation, that everything's fine, we made it, we are catching up with Western Europe, with Germany, France, Italy, etc. But just a couple of years ago, we found out that we are not there yet, that we are trapped in this cheap economy, and that basically a second phase of transformation is ahead of us. And it will be much more difficult than the first phase of transformation. Because at the beginning, we only opened the borders, invited foreign investors, provided cheap labor, great infrastructure, and it started working very fast. Now, to get out of the cheap labor means generate domestic capital, keep it in the country. It means to have great universities with excellent students who don't leave the country, but stay. If you want them to stay, you have to give them excellent jobs, not just, manual work on the assembly line in Skoda. It requires very intensive cooperation between companies and universities. We are very bad at that. And it requires reforms. Reforms of pension system, healthcare system. Because if you don't reform it, your indirect cost of labor, which is a burden for companies, will increase and are already increasing, etc., etc., etc. So, as I said, from the outside, it looks great, but if you look below the economy and if you see what's going on within the companies and the economic system, you see that it's an undone job, and that we'll be facing quite a few challenges in the years to come. Thanks for your attention. And as I said, I'm not here to preach but to listen. Exactly, I was about to encourage you to ask questions, so let's go for it. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to ask how you have invested in the young population and equipping them with entrepreneurial skills. Thank you.
It's the worst question I could possibly experience, because we are doing a horrible job in this respect, I have to say. Why? It can be explained with our history, and I briefly touched upon it. We are a country of employees, not employers. When you have such an industrialized economy, it means that your economy is composed of big industrial export-oriented companies. They employ people, but they don't encourage entrepreneurship and entrepreneur spirit. And that's exactly what we are facing at the moment. When you ask not only older generation, but young generation, what they want to do, their top priority is to start working for Google, then Skoda Auto, then Saska, the investor in Greece, and other big companies. But only 10% of young people want to become entrepreneurs. And it's a huge problem, I think, and we have to do something about it. But as we learned during our transformation, it's easy to change laws and come up with new regulation. You can do it overnight, but to change mentality of a nation takes decades. So we are working on it, but it will take us 20 more years. And one more point, and I would be really interested whether it's the same case in Greece. When I talk to young people about this and I tell them, look at myself, I established my business 2 years ago. I'm 42. It's never too late to start, do it, don't be worried about it. And they say, we are worried because when you fail in our society, it's a stigma. In the United States, and I'm sure many of you visited the United States and you felt that in the air.
It's an experience.
It's an experience. When you go to Silicon Valley to ask your angel investors for an investment, they usually ask you, how many times did you go bankrupt in the past? And if you say never, because that's what you think you should say coming from the Czech Republic, they won't give you the money. They want you to go through this test. They want to see a person who failed, but who stood up again, learned from his mistakes and started again from the scratch. That's what they are looking for. But in our part of the world, it's a stigma. You go bankrupt and you are not expected to show up in business anymore. In the East, in China, it's even worse. They call it losing face. You go bankrupt, you lost a lot of money, you lost your face, and you are expected to commit a suicide in the woods, somewhere.
In Greece, if you are blacklisted, you never get the loan again.
Okay. For example, one of the priorities we worked on when I was in the government was to speed up the process of a bankruptcy process. So when you get into it, it does not take 15 years to recover again. It must take 4 years, and you have to have a second chance. So this is a big problem we are facing. How it is in Greece?
It's the same.
Okay.
May I ask?
Yeah.
So, if you please, may you explain some topics, by my own opinion, steps which concern relationships EU-Russia. For first, you open border with the Ukrainian Republic and local markets in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and first of all Poland, full by the very cheaper Ukrainian workers.
Yes.
And they destruct all the local markets for the local economy.
Okay.
It's way to never. But other way, you became more and more sanction against Russian Federation, and you became very difficult. Simple people, like tourists. You know that Russian tourists very lovely for Czech Republic and Prague and Karlovy Vary and that one. But now, one tourist from Russian Federation must to have very difficult steps to take a visa Schengen. But other way, you opened the so-called gold visa program, which benefits a lot of criminal, mafiosos elements from the countries of before Soviet Union, which stayed in Czech Republic, as well as Cyprus, Malta, Spain, and they built mafiosos structures inside the European Union, and they rule in those countries like in Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, Georgia, Armenia, being inside European Union. What's your opinion about this this understanding point?
Okay, sure. We are getting to interesting questions. I'm happy to answer them. Because it's related to what I've been describing, in my presentation. 2% unemployment, you are missing people. You need people. And you have basically two ways how to manage that structural problem within your job market. You will either start investing in an enormous way into digitalization, automatization, and robotization, because that decreases your demand for humans. And we are already doing it, but it takes time. You cannot replace 30,000 people on your assembly line within 3 weeks. It takes a year to do that. So that's in process. But in business, yesterday is already gone, and tomorrow is too late. So you need a quick solution. And the quick solution is import of labor force from foreign countries. So we actually pushed the government to open the borders of Czech Republic to Ukrainians, Belarusians, Serbs, people from Moldova, Vietnam, Mongolia, etc. But what we experienced in the Czech Republic, unlike what our colleagues experienced in Poland, was reluctance to do that. So in Poland, according to our estimates, there are 1.5 or maybe almost 2 million Ukrainians working in Poland. Maybe they will not stop in Poland, they will go to Western Europe. And it helps Polish companies. While in the case of the Czech Republic, because of our politicians, and we had at that time when it was an issue, social democratic government, the social democrats, backed by the labor unions, said no. Although we see that companies are missing people, we don't want to open the labor market to foreigners. And we were only able to persuade our government to invite 20,000 medium and highly skilled Ukrainians to our job market. So in our case, it didn't work. For example, and this is off the record information, but we are in the Athens, so I can use it. We pushed for Vietnamese because we have very good experience, even from the communist times, with Vietnamese minority. They work extremely hard. Their students get university degrees, and the economy needs both their parents and their children. And the Secret Service said no, because Vietnamese are deeply involved in organized crime, mostly cultivating wheat and marijuana in the Czech Republic. So they said, no, we will not open borders to this minority. So as I said, we ended up with 20,000 Ukrainians, which is not much. Because at the moment, as we speak, in the Czech Republic, there are 375 open jobs that cannot be fulfilled. We are missing almost 400,000 jobs. And we needed people from the outside, but politicians said no. In Poland and other countries, they adopted different policies with some of the consequences you described, but it was not our case at the moment. And for us, I have to say, in the short term, is very difficult. But in the long run, I think we will benefit because it pushes my company, our companies, to invest into robotization, digitalization, etc., and not to count on cheaper labor from the East.
Any other question? Please.
you very much. I'm from Indonesia. I'm far away from Czech and Greek. Thank you very much. I'm there with your explanation about the economy. I follow your presentation very, very keenly. And thanks very much as well for college inviting me. Thank you very much. You know, my family and I, you know, Czech is like part of us. Because when I was a kid, you know, we are wearing bata.
Okay.
All Indonesia, can you imagine? The big, huge bata company in Jakarta. And then when I entered the foreign ministry, you know, almost every diplomat of Indonesia, you have in your room, in your home, Petrov.
Petrov, piano, Petrov.
And also the, you know,
glasses, chandelier, yeah.
So what I would like to say is that Czech is very potential. You're very right on this. I would like to ask you how you see, you know, in Indonesia or also this Asia. In fact, the economy is there, you know.
Okay.
And you know, Indonesia, you know, in the 16th economy in the world, and we become number 5 or number 7.
Yeah.
And well, when we were a kid, we were wearing bata. We are missing Skoda now.
Okay.
Okay. That's my question to you.
I might have some good news for you concerning Skoda cars in Indonesia, but that's really off the record, and my ex-colleagues would kill me, you know, if I said too much in this respect. But we think that the future is in your region, and my previous speaker touched upon it a little bit. You know, this country used to rule the world, you know, a few centuries ago. Up until recently, it was Europe, which was, together with the United States, the global champion of the world. It's changing. It will be China, like it or not, you know, and we have to face it. And I'll give you one specific example, and that's the sector I'm most familiar with. It's the automotive industry. What's going on at the moment in the automotive industry in Europe is the following. Young people, you guys, you don't like to own your cars for some strange reason, you know, because according to opinion polls car makers are receiving, you consider it rather a burden than a symbol of social status and something you would like to have, you know, because you want mobility but not the ownership of car, because to own car is costly, you cannot park it anywhere, you get stuck in traffic jam, and you use it, you know, an hour in a day. So the problem of car makers in Europe is that they are missing customers. For us, older generation, I have 3 cars, you know, I'm the petrol head, you know, I love it. But for my children, car is a burden. So car makers are losing customers in Europe. They have to look elsewhere. Guess where foreign car is a symbol of social status? It's in Asia, it's in China. You know, the mobilization of China is enormous. And I was just told at Georgetown a few weeks ago that every year in China, 10 million people with purchasing power comparable to European middle class is being created. 10 million people every year with our purchasing power. So you have to be there because your customers are there. And the future is there. But how it looks at the moment for us in China, for Volkswagen, for example, well, first of all, and you might know it from your businesses as well, if you decide to do business in China, you have to set up a joint venture, and you are not allowed to be a majority shareholder. So you go there, you set up a joint venture, you have a local Chinese partner, and you own 49%. It's not the case in all sectors, but in many sectors, including automotive, it's the case. So you are a minority shareholder. That's how it starts. Secondly, you have to localize your suppliers. So if you thought that you would be providing jobs to people in Athens, in your domestic factory producing seats, and then you will ship it to Shanghai, to your Chinese cars, no way. They would put tariffs on your seats that would make the seats impossible to sell. So you have to localize. You have to create jobs for the Chinese in China. That's the second step. Third step, and that's what I experienced when I was still with Volkswagen, with Skoda. If you want to sell electric cars in China, you have to transfer all your IP rights to China, to the modern technologies you are using. So you are selling your intellectual property, you are selling sending your intellectual property to China. And last but not least, and that's the latest development, if you want to be there in the long run, you have to help your Chinese joint venture partner to set up a brand new indigenous Chinese automotive brand. So my ex-boss from Škoda at the moment, he is in Chengdu, working for one of the German-Chinese joint venture, and he introduced brand new Chinese brand in China. It's called Jetta. And I bet with you that when the Chinese say at the moment, you know, we will be using these Chinese brands for our domestic market, we will sell to the Chinese because the consumption is so high. Yes, they will do it for 5 years. And then they will start competing with Volkswagen in Europe and in the United States. It sounds crazy to do it, and I'm asking myself, why are we doing this? Why are we helping them to reach us and even overcome? Well, you have to do it because the customers are there and there's no other way, but we will pay the price. How do we win this? Well, that's what I described. Cooperation of universities and companies. I believe in creative industry, for example. I think Europe and the United States could be big in computer games, for example. Virtual reality applications, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and stuff like that. We have to be there. We have to do it. And if we don't, they will take over in everything. So the future is in your region. We are looking at it. You will be driving Skodas, I guess soon, and it's a must, you know. But at the moment, we are fighting for survival. You know, you're too good in that part of the world at the moment. You know.
Speaking of numbers, as you said before, I'd like to ask you very
5 minutes ago
regarding the banking sector, how it grows, provided that the Greek economy is very much heavily regulated as far as its banks are regarded.
Okay.
So liquidity is not provided to the real economy, and the crisis cannot invest, cannot develop R&D. So what would you choose?
Yeah. Banking sector finance is a big topic. We were struggling with the quality of our banking sector in the 90s. And what we had at that time was called banking socialism, which meant that at the beginning of the transformation, the big banks were owned by the state. And because the politicians did not want big companies to go bankrupt, because thousands of people would lose their jobs, they were financing these unprofitable, unproductive companies through state-owned banks, through the banks under political control. And that was a huge problem. We lost a lot of money. Those companies went bankrupt anyway, but swallowed a lot of money beforehand, etc., etc. So, and I must say, although I'm a big critic of our current president, Miloš Zeman, the former Social Democratic Prime Minister, he privatized the banking sector. He said, this is enough. We cannot be supporting unprosperous companies through state-owned banks. This is horrible. It's incest, let's stop it. And he privatized the whole banking sector. So at the moment, Czech Republic does not own a single bank. It's all private banks, and as I said, they belong to the Austrian banks, Belgian banks, French banks, etc. And they kept their finance under control from the very beginning. In our case, I know that they were acting differently in different countries, but in our case, because of our central bank, which was doing an excellent job from the very beginning, they were not able to send money abroad. They did not get involved in risky deals and the risky lending, etc., etc. So we had our banking sector under full control of the central bank for years. And for example, during the 2008, we had no problems with banks, no problems at all. So at the moment, our banks are full of cash. If you ask Erste, which daughter company is the best, the most profitable daughter in Central Eastern Europe, they say Erste Bank, Česká spořitelna in the Czech Republic. They love us because we generate for them a lot of money, and this money is available to companies. We don't have a functioning stock exchange. It exists, but it plays no role in the economy. Our companies are not used to going on the stock exchange for money. They borrow it from banks when they need money, and the banks lend it without any problems. They are full of cash. When you talk to, I talk to CEOs of the 3 biggest banks on regular basis. Every time we meet, they complain about the lack of good business projects that they could finance. It's their only problem. What they complain about is EU regulation. They say, we are doing fine in the Czech Republic, we are under the control of central bank, everything is okay, we don't need that horrible EU regulation which is coming now and is getting bigger and bigger. But it's because of other countries with a banking sector which is not as organized as it is in the Czech Republic. So banking sector is not a problem for us at all.
We can have a last question.
So I'm sure you've noticed a trend in the technology department that due to technology innovations, many manual jobs are going to become absent.
Yes.
They will not exist anymore.
Yes.
So if Czech is an economy which relies on workers
Yes.
work manually,
Yes.
how is it going to face
Yes.
that sort of a problem in the future?
Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent question. And if you read studies by the IMF, by the World Bank, by OECD, they actually identify Czech Republic as a country with the highest risks when it comes to replacement of people by machines, robots, digital systems, etc. Because we have so many people on assembly lines in the industry, as you rightly pointed out. So for us, it's a huge challenge. And you have 2 schools of thought. When I go on TV with the head of labor unions, he goes there and he says, we will lose 1 million jobs in half a year. The government, you must do something before it's too late, etc., etc. Our policy is, we can't wait, because we are missing almost 500,000 jobs. So 500,000 is already okay, because we are missing the people. So if their jobs, which we cannot fulfill with humans, will be taken over by machines, we'll be happy. And the second 500,000, and I doubt that it will be 1 million, okay? But let's take their numbers seriously. If it is 1 million, then we have to deal with the second 500,000. And yes, those people will lose jobs, and it will be up to us, companies and employers, to provide those people with requalifications, with different training. It will be up to the government to think about that when it comes to the structure of educational system. And it must start on the level of elementary schools, secondary schools, as well as tertiary education at universities. And we are always saying, this is 4th industrial revolution. This is not the 1st industrial revolution, it's 4th industrial revolution. Just look at Look what happened during the previous industrial revolutions. Yes, a lot of people lost their jobs, but the revolution, the new technologies created new jobs, new opportunities. So it's not easy, but you only need to prepare people that there will be new opportunities generated by the new economic system which we are getting into. It will not be easy, but I am very optimistic in this respect when it comes to the Czech Republic, because, for example, in services, we have almost nobody. Like the sector of services is very limited. So even if 500,000 people left industry because their jobs would be replaced by robots, for example, they could easily go to services, taking care of elderly people, for example, because we are dying out as a population. And we are getting enormous amounts of seniors. Somebody must take care of them. So a lot of people from the industry will actually be able to get new jobs taking care of our seniors, when the need comes. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us companies, but we are ready. We are not afraid. We know what to do. And I'm slightly more skeptical about the government, whether the government will be able to prepare the population for these changes through the educational system. We are not good in changing our educational system and making it more ready for what's going on in the private sector and in the economy. But we will manage. I guess that we will manage. Thank you very much. It was great. Thank you.
Today's event has been completed. We were given the opportunity to hear very important views, opinions and facts. We sincerely thank all the speakers and all of you who have been with us today and renew our appointment for the next academic event of our educational group. Thank you.